like to see if people are paying attention. Purple guy. Sus. Okay, so yeah, today's our first release of an assignment that's worth marks. So far, because things blow up quite a bit in the early days of certificate services, I don't really make anything worth marks. It's just you're going to need it as we go on. Now we're getting to the point where you have to have something functional, and then we're actually going to start using it. Okay. So if you check out the calendar here, we've got AD Rights Management Service. I'm releasing it early. I'm going to keep the due date the same, October 1st. Okay, so you're going to have plenty of time to work on it. You think Jacob was lost? He'll find he'll be okay, eventually. That is funny though. I do that all the time. Well, not all the time, but once in a while. Okay, so um, yeah, you have more time to do this than expected, just because we're way ahead of schedule. We're about a week ahead, which is a good thing actually, because there is some extra material which I'd like to kind of slip in just to round things out a little bit for you. So the next week, I'm not really going. There might be one more exercise, but mostly I'm just going to focus on kind of filling in a couple of gaps in terms of concepts and stuff. So the real work that you're going to have to do is going to be ADRMS. Okay, there will be the oddest exercise here or there, but it won't be too heavy. Okay, pretty paint by numbers. And then you're going to see that you're going to be assessed. It's going to be like a slow drip of assessments here. Okay. Um, none of them are too bad, really, except for the ADCS lab. That's typically been rather hard. Okay. Which I'm looking to kind of rejig. So we'll see. We'll see whether that's going to be a challenge or not. PowerShell DSC, the 15% ones are the tough ones, really. Everything else you can expect it's pretty standard fare. Okay. Essentially what I've done is I've taken exercises and made them worth marks. And you just have to show that you got it functioning. Okay. So it is an ongoing parade of assignments, but it's most of them are not that bad. Okay, so let's see. Today we're doing, yeah, I'm going to talk about ADRMS just because I'm releasing it right now. So this is one of the harder topics, actually, in a way. It's not hard to get going necessarily. It's just there's a lot of little details in it, which, from a theory side, it makes it a little harder to deal with. Okay, so if you have to troubleshoot, it's a little bit more of a challenge. But if you follow the steps carefully, then you're not going to have too many problems. Okay, you got to watch out about paying attention, make sure that your infrastructure is good, and everything should be okay. But AD rights management is a bit of a pain. Before I get going, any questions about any of the stuff that I just mentioned in terms of timelines, all that kind of stuff? All right, let's do this. Okay, so be able to define what AD rights management does exactly. Be able to describe how it works. That's the tougher part. What it does is pretty straightforward. So rights management essentially enforces limitations on what people can do with documents. That's really what it does. Okay. So the purpose is to protect intellectual property. At least that's what they sell it as. So if you're a company and you have some intellectual property or even trade secrets, right? Which you can't enforce, but you try and keep them secret so that other people don't use them. Um, Rights management can be useful. So I know, like, one guy that I worked with in the past, he used to support an oil fields company, and they had certain techniques that they didn't want the competition to make use of. And so they were very concerned that their documents, because they would get employees who would quit and go work for the competition and might take their expertise with them. They were very concerned that any kind of documentation that they kept remain with the company and not be able to be exported, right? And so that's where rights management can come in. Okay, it's uh, it's not a perfect tool, but it does set a certain bar for people violating the intent of what rights management is trying to enforce, right? So the way that it works is everybody gets a license essentially. There's a centralized server, which you have to have AD rights management enabled applications. So Office is one of those. Okay, so anything in Office you can apply rights management to. It is a special license that you have to pay Microsoft for, so it's an extra feature. But if you do that, you can define documents and you can say, well, this one, this set of people can read this document, but they can't print it and they can't save it or duplicate it. Okay. And maybe they can't take it, they can only view it on this particular computer. So if you take it off and try and open it on another laptop, it's not going to let you. Okay. So basically, what happens is every user has to be registered with rights management. So they get a certificate, and that's where certificates come in. Uh, the server also has a certificate, but the users get a certificate to prove who they are so that you can determine what rights they should have for a particular document. Okay? Now, it comes with its own policy templates. So like read only, for example, would carry with it a certain set of features. They're default ones that Microsoft offers, but you can also create your own. Okay. So you might just say, well, nobody can forward this in email, and that's the only thing you're really concerned about. You can create your own policy template about that. Okay. And the idea is you take that template, you apply it to that document, and it gets incorporated into the document in a way that rights management can check on every time the document gets opened. Okay. What that means is that when Office encounters a rights managed file, it knows that it has to check with the rights management server, and it won't let the user actually do anything with it until it's been allowed to. Okay. So there's this constant dial back to this ADRMS server. And the policies are embedded in the document, but the document itself is actually encrypted. So you're not really going to be able to just pull it off site and pick it apart and dissect it. Okay. So when it leaves the premises, it's still protected. Even if a user has a laptop, they can work on it on that laptop, but they can't really take it off because it'll just be bricked at that point, the document itself, right? Not the laptop. So web services are involved because of that constant dialing back that has to go on. Okay. Now, part of this, you can actually allow third parties access to your rights management server. So it is possible, even if you have partners, say, in a corporate kind of cooperation agreement, you can share your documents with people outside the organization, even though they're encrypted. But you've got to have this external access with your web service so that they can actually connect back and be able to prove that they are who they claim to be. Okay. The reason that this works is because all they have to do is get a certificate from the rights management server. They don't need to be a part of your Active Directory. Okay. So this is the role in Windows Server. It's MMC administered, which you'll play around with. Now, typically we use in a larger environment, you're going to use SQL. We're just using the stripped down SQL version that comes automatically with it, so we're not going to install SQL ourselves. Okay. But if you're scaling up with a lot of users, then SQL would be the way to go. Okay. You need AD for some authentication. Um, However, that doesn't apply to the certificates themselves. The certificates are a separate concern. So when you get a certificate, you're going to need AD. Once you've got your certificate, you're pretty good. Okay. You need a special ADRMS client, which means that if I have a Word document and I try and open it in, I don't know, like Google, the Google Docs, let's say, it doesn't have a built-in client, so it's not really going to be able to help you. Okay. So you have to use something like Office or some RMS-enabled client. You got to have this web service available, either just internally if you want to keep everything internal, or else you got to open it up to the outside world. Okay, if you have other parties that need to gain access to it, it could be done through VPN as well. Um, Microsoft message queuing, I'm not really going to worry about that. It's a bit more of a programming thing, but it's basically a way of handling multiple requests. Right? So it does support 80 federation services. So someone external, another organization could actually make use of your ADRMS. That's one of the ways that we support that. Supports the delegation of roles. So like I said with certificate services itself, you can split this out into different functions where one person's administering ADRMS, another one's managing the policy templates, another person's managing auditing. Okay, it's the same concept, really. So if you're a large enough organization, you can split that up. Okay, so this is the basic setup. You've got a client or multiple clients, right? But he'll just represent all of our clients here. You have to have an Active Directory domain in order for all of this to function. You also have to have an ADRMS server. Okay. Somehow I can't join the online class. It's not showing on my side. Can you hear? I guess I shouldn't ask that until I know. Okay. I'm going to keep going. But yeah, so you've got your Active Directory domain, you've got your RMS server, which is it's basically doing all the yes, no, uh, well, it's pretty much yes, no. So it's deciding this is what you can do, right? You're allowed to open this document or you're not. You're allowed, if you're not allowed to print it, the client-side application will get all that information and will refuse to do it. Okay, good. So it's enforced on the client side, but the decisions are made by the RMS server. It's the one who actually says this is what you're allowed to do. Okay. Now the SQL Server is kind of that's optional. Okay, so you might have a backend going to the SQL Server, you might not. It could just be on the server itself. And then you've got to have an IIS server, which is granting access to the outside world. All the clients are going directly, not directly, indirectly, through the IIS server to talk to the ADRMS server. Okay, so we're going to collapse a lot of that. We're just going to have an Active Directory server, a client, and then these three functions are all going to be on one server. Okay, just for our purposes. But this is how you could split it out if you wanted to. Okay, so the root clusters, you notice that's a plural. You can have more than one, okay? And they can handle both certification and licensing. So certification is granting certificates to users, okay? Licensing is setting limitations on documents, and that includes encrypting the documents and stuff like that. You can only have one cluster per forest. We have a cluster of one, okay? Um, but basically you can only have one for the whole shebang. So not just for the domain, but the whole forest. And it will load balance between servers in the cluster unless you got a server of, a cluster of one. It is possible to have licensing only servers. So their only job is to handle most of the busy work, which is really just um, kind of setting policies on documents and then saying yes or no to certain requests. Okay. This certificate side is less frequent. It occurs less frequency. It's a lighter load because once the users have their certs, they just have to renew them periodically. Once a year or whatever you have set up. Okay. Um, so you can have licensing only servers if you're a busy environment, and then they only handle licensing. They don't deal with the certificates. But in that case, then you can't load balance between those two types. Okay. So it's kind of an either or situation. You have to decide how you're going to do that. Now, it's not a big deal for us because we're just doing a single case. Okay, this is where it gets a little hairy. The 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 process is kind of involved. So, first of all, the user has to get a certificate. The certificate identifies them. How do they get that certificate? You got to be a member of Active Directory to get a cert. Okay. So you can set up federation services for remote, entities, and then you can trust that domain, right? But basically, you need some kind of Active Directory to get all of that to work. Once you're at that point, they can auto enroll for rights account certificates. So as soon as you open an app that supports this, it'll ask and request for a rights account certificate. Okay, and then Active Directory will provide all the information about you. Then the user has to create some content with, let's say, Office, so some kind of an app. It could be Outlook. Outlook supports it too, right? With RMS, an RMS enabled application. So the app has to be able to understand and work with RMS. Uh, and then the user will call on whatever policy templates are published by the administrator. Okay. So they can't really kind of make it up on their own. They have to work with what's there. And so it's up to the administrator to decide these are the kind of features we're offering. This is the kind of limitations we can put in place. Okay. And then the user gets to select from that kind of that tray of hors d'oeuvres. Now, once the user has their content and they've decided what template they want to do, then they have to get a license. So they already have a certificate that identifies them. Now they need essentially permission to publish. Okay. So they get issued a publishing license by the RMS server, and the server then tells the application, yeah, go ahead, you can, encrypt it with these policy restrictions in place. Okay. And then that's pretty much it. The user who's using their own app, they'll have full access, assuming that's what they gave themselves, which they should. Other users, it depends what was assigned according to the policy template. So if another user comes along and they try and open it without an RMS app, then they're not going to be able to view the content, no matter what. If they do have an RMS app, it's then they're gonna have to go back and validate that they have rights to access the document. So they've got to go back to the RMS server. And this is all handled kind of automatically, right? Like it's going on behind the scenes. So the application that they're using, their RMS app, is going to request a user license from the RMS server, which gives them the right to access that document. Okay, that's not the same thing as a rights account certificate. It's just the right to read this particular document. Okay. So their user rights will be verified. So basically, are you in any groups that give you extra rights, or do you have the restricted default rights? You know. So the user rights are verified. The license is issued with those limitations in place, or it may be determined that you have no rights at all, in which case you're denied access. You just have an encrypted lump on your hands that you can't open. Okay. Now, the user license that gets assigned to that user, it gets incorporated into the document that they're trying to read. Okay, so every time they go back to that document in the future, they don't have to dial back constantly. It's going to say, yeah, yeah, you have access to this, but it's tied to whatever computer and application that they're on. Okay, so let's say it's a laptop. If they take that file off of the laptop and try and open it on another machine, they're not going to have the they're not going to have the rights account certificate or anything like that, or the validated uh, license to read that they would have had on the laptop, and so they're just going to again have an encrypted lump that they can't really work with. Okay. So the machine that you're on, you're kind of tied to that in terms of accessing the content. Okay. Or else you have to re-authenticate, re-verify yourself if you go to a different machine. Okay. So there's a server license certificate that's self-signed for the ADRMS server itself, which means because it's self-signed, it's not inherently trusted. You have to configure that in Active Directory to get it to work. Okay. The rights account certificate, that's for the users, and that just verifies who they are. You've got to have an email-enabled account in Active Directory. That doesn't mean you have to have a mailbox. It means that you have to have the email field in your Active Directory account. Okay, so this is a place where this is a thing where people kind of mess up a little bit. They'll try and have a user publish something, but they don't have an email, and because they don't have an email, the automation process of ADRMS doesn't work, and then they're not able to actually use ADRMS. Okay, but it's an easy fix. You just go back, you edit the Active Directory user, and you just add in any email address. It really doesn't matter. Okay, I mean it does matter, but you can fake it out essentially. So these certificates that are being issued here, they identify the trusted entities, the users who are able to create content. But that doesn't, beyond that, each document is going to have its own publishing rights associated with it. Okay. And those get embedded in the document. Okay. So the rights account certificate, it's the default behavior. It's good for 1 year. That could be massaged. It is possible to gain temporary ones that are not tied to a computer, but usually these certificates are tied to the computer that you're running on. Okay, so in other words, it's being stored in your certificate store on that computer. Okay, you can get temporary ones that don't tie the user to the computer, but they expire extremely quickly. So it's built in that you're expected to work from the same machine all the time, or else get permission again. Okay. So the certificate contains both private and the public key of the user, and that gets stored on the computer. Okay. The private key is encrypted with the computer's private key, and so that's why it's really tied to the machine. As soon as you take that off, there's no way to decrypt that private key, and because you're on a different computer, and then you're out of luck, right? So that's what breaks it if you take it off of that particular system. Okay, the client license certificate. So this is your essentially your ability to publish things. Like once a content publisher's been trusted, so once they have a rights account certificate, and they get this license certificate, they can then assign rights to particular documents. That's as opposed to just reading stuff, or accessing content. So each time a protection policy is assigned to a document, ADRMS issues a publishing license just for that content, and then that gets incorporated into the document itself in an encrypted form. Okay? And so you don't need to access the RMS server all the time. It's not constantly dialing back because you've encrypted it on that local computer. That's what you're tied to now. Okay? So all of the publishing information is there embedded in the document and protected by the local computer. So the protected content is encrypted much like an AD certificate services content. Um, so it's the same basic process. When other users try to access that content, then they've got to get their own usage license from the server. Okay, so it's not the server then has to decide whether it's gonna and allow them to access it, and if it does, it'll add them into the document on the machine that they're working on, and then uh, re-encrypt it. Okay, and then that user can access it on that machine. Now, what about the machine certificate? We talked about the machine's private key. Um, is this just made automatically at the time you install the system? No, it gets created the first time that you actually run ADRMS. Okay, so you have an app that's running that's using it. That's when the machine certificate is going to be created. And the publishing certificate gets created when the user tries to create content that's rights protected. Yeah. So those are both pretty close in time, most likely, since when you start using it is probably the first time that the machine's actually gonna try and do anything. Now, the publishing certificate will list any users who can use the content and then what they're allowed to do with it. So some users might have more rights than others, right? Some people could be read only, other people can have full access, for example. So this is all done using symmetric keys, but it's the machine that has the public-private key that's actually encrypting everything. And part of what it's encrypting is a symmetric key. And then the symmetric key can then be used to decrypt other aspects of the document. Okay. Uh, all users are equal, but some users are more. That's totally true. But that is the way it is in Windows world. Administrators are kind of fascistic. Okay, so the user license is assigned to the user who tries to open the content, and it's tied to their certificate. Okay. If they don't have a certificate, they can't access the content in the first place. So that's why if you take it offline, you're kind of out of luck. It contains a symmetric key for decrypting content and the public key of that user. Okay. It's a little bit involved, but you use a symmetric key for most of the data in the content, but then you have to encrypt that symmetric key because it's being distributed to all sorts of people, right? So individual users are going to have their public-private key, and then the symmetric key to decrypt the entire document is going to be stored in a special place in the document, which should only be decryptable by you. And so for every user, that symmetric key is going to be encrypted with their public key, and then it's only their private key that can decrypt it. So you might have multiple fields of users with the same symmetric key encrypted with different people's uh, public keys. Okay. So every time you add a user, you might add one of those encrypted symmetric keys. And it's the same key each time. It's just available to different users in different fields. Okay. Okay, so you can then add a user, and that's just another field that's added into the document. Okay. So AD rights management, you can use it to target only a portion of your organization, but if you do that, you have to use exclusion policies. So by default, this applies to well, really the entire forest, right? Although I would normally expect it to be a domain. And because this is like there's one solution to rule them all, right? You should have a super users group that can always decrypt any document. Okay. So that's part of the setup that you're going to do in the assignment is to set up a super users group where you can recover if anything goes horribly wrong. So let's say somebody's got they've got um, their certificate on a laptop. The laptop gets stolen, but there's really crucial data there, right? They're now no longer able to access their own encrypted content because they don't have that certificate anymore. Um, you need a super user who can actually override that. And so once you set that up, every time you should do this at the start, but every time a user comes in and they say, I'm gonna encrypt this document and I'm gonna make it read only for these people and all that kind of stuff. The super users group, there's going to be a special key which is inserted in there, which is always available. And typically the domain admin is the one who's able to come in and can open anything. Okay, it's like a skeleton, what they call a skeleton key or a master key, right? So that should be embedded in every document that is using AD rights management. Okay, so lots of little details in a nutshell. The purpose of rights management, protection of intellectual property, and license management. Okay. Now, I will say this. To me, this is like a fence in your house, around your house. A fence actually doesn't stop anybody. It just indicates very clearly to them that they're not supposed to be on your property, right? Um, so yes, someone could jump the fence. Someone could take photos of a document, right? Just because it's being protected by Word, it doesn't mean that there aren't other ways they can grab the information. So I don't consider this, that hardy of a protection mechanism. But what it does do is it makes it very clear that if you're taking stuff offline, um, you know that what you're doing is something you're not supposed to do, right? And so, it can be good grounds for firing and things like that. It pretty clearly shows, or even suing someone. It pretty clearly shows intent. I think that's really the purpose of it. So you got to jump through quite a few hoops in order to bypass ADRMS. But it's not exactly a perfect solution, not by any stretch at all. It was created, I think, before smartphones were um, really that pervasive. So they may have felt it was a little stronger than it actually is at that time. However, nowadays it's just really about, yeah, you putting a lock on your door, it's like, yeah, breaking and entering. The fact that you broke in instead of just opening a door that wasn't locked indicates that you knew what you were doing, right? So 80 documents are created with usage rights, read, write, print, forward, that kind of stuff, that are embedded in the document itself. And they typically come from policy templates defined by the admin. These remain in the document whether it's taken offline or not. And then web services can be used to extend access to external sites, organizations, and provide cross-platform capability. But the machine that you originally did this on plays an important role. Okay. Okay, so now you get to go into the fun stuff here, which is I know that's the concepts are fairly straightforward. The implementation is a little ugly, but the exercise is not that bad, or the assignment. Okay. So really, you've got I need 5 screenshots. That's what I'm looking for from you. I'll talk about how that gets how you give that to me in a second here. Okay, so the assignment should be available to you by now. If you're having trouble getting access to it, let me know, but I think it should be good. And it really just, this is it here. It's 10%, so I give you a mark out of 10. But each of the screenshots is worth 2. Okay. So you either did it really perfectly. Uh, there are some things missing, in which case you'll get 1 mark out of 2. Or you didn't do it right at all, in which case I'll give you 0 marks out of 2. Okay. So those are kind of the ways that you're going to get evaluated on this. Each of these screenshots where I'm saying take a screenshot and replace the image below, each of them have a little bit of information that I'm looking for. For example, I have my user account here, and I've got a couple of other user accounts. I'm looking to see that you do the same thing, right? So you want to replace this image with equivalent information, but I'd expect to see your own account in there. Okay. Same thing with all the ones that follow here. So when I tell you to take an image, I'll be looking for specific things, and then if they're missing, I'll let you know. Okay. Um, Here too, like what we're going to be doing is we're going to set up a server. It's going to have its own name, but we're going to actually give it a different alias, which we're going to use for rights management, which is going to be rightsmanagement.ca.ca. Okay. So the machine itself is actually called 2515-RMS, right? But it's also going to go by this DNS name. And so we're going to configure the server so that the certificate it uses permits this name to be used. That's just a kind of an extra wrinkle that I wanted to throw in here, but I want to be very clear about that. This is the name of the server. This is a DNS name associated with the certificate we're going to use. Okay. So there should be a difference between these, and I'll be looking for that. Um, you're going to add yourself in terms of user rights to create a document, and the URL should be that alias that you'll be creating in DNS. Okay. And I mentioned there were a few other accounts that we're actually going to create, and they're going to be given some rights to the document. So here's Len Edelman, okay, and he's going to have restricted access to a document that we create. I'm the author, but he does have rights management permissions associated with this, and it tells us specifically that it's restricted. So I'd expect to see your name here, but still you're logged in as Len Edelman. So you created the document, but Len Edelman is the one accessing it. So that's what this screenshot is going to show. And it should show that he doesn't have full access. Okay. So this is pretty paint by numbers. There are little things that can go wrong. So do read carefully. That's the one thing I'd kind of suggest, especially Jacob, because Jacob, you tend to jump ahead. You kind of leap before you look, you know. Just, especially when it comes to the names and stuff like that, you could break stuff. If you do it wrong, then you have to go back and start over. Okay. So you have a fair amount of time. This is not going to be a stress case, but you know, um, do kind of when you do decide to start working on this, make sure that you just sit down and focus on it a little bit because it is kind of detail oriented. Any questions? Okay, I let you go. I release you. Genie, I set you free. See you later. Have a good one. Yeah, catch you later.